So, Tom, I appreciate you taking the time to actually chat and hang with us. Maybe let us know, first of all, I want to know, how are you doing post Freedom Convoy?
Uh, I'm good. Like everybody else right now, I'm kind of glued to social media and alternative media, um, and trying to kind of find out what's really coming next. Like many people, I think I'm still pretty skeptical of what were the reasons behind Justin Trudeau revoking the Emergencies Act.
Hmm.
So I have a few suspicions as to that. But really, I'm very cautious, and I want to take a wait and see approach for now to see what really is behind his motivation to turn it off. Was it the Senate? Did he feel like the Senate was going to vote him down, and then hopefully for Canadians, um, sort of force a vote of no confidence if he'd have lost this legislation that he wanted. I said when I was with the Freedom Convoy, I was asked on occasion to speak on their behalf, and we were always about the mandates. That's what we were
Mhm.
about, the mandates, to end the mandates. But now that we're no longer in Ottawa, I have to strike the right balance, because the truckers gave me an opportunity to have a voice. So um, I don't want to sort of disrespect the opportunity that the truckers gave me to have a voice on interviews such as yours right now. But as a citizen of this country who spent the last 3.5 weeks trying to assert or reassert our inalienable rights, and everything that I've seen gone on, and everything that I witnessed firsthand in Ottawa with the Gestapo tactics of the law enforcement there. As a citizen of Canada, it's very, very clear to me that I think Justin Trudeau needs to resign, and I think Chrystia Freeland also needs to go. I don't
Mhm.
know who's going to fill in for them, but I think Canadians really should have another election at this point. I think the Liberals have done so much damage, and what's also encouraging is that the Conservatives now are starting to behave like Conservatives used to.
Hmm.
Now that they've lost their leader, they've decapitated their leader, and so now they're starting to behave like Conservatives. They're starting to behave like an actual opposition,
Yeah.
and so maybe there's an appetite for Canadians, because the reason that Aaron O'Toole's no longer the Conservative Party leader is because he lost to the most hated prime minister in Canadian history, and that's why Aaron O'Toole doesn't have a job anymore.
Mhm.
So now maybe there's an opportunity.
Well, Tom, there's a number of things you touched on that obviously I think a lot of Canadians are asking post Freedom Convoy, Emergency Measures Act. But I want to get to that in a second. But before we jump to that, I want people to know who you are, just in case they aren't familiar with you. They've probably seen you behind press conferences with Freedom Convoy. You became a spokesperson and a face of the Freedom Convoy. First of all, tell us a little bit about number one, how did you get involved with the Freedom Convoy, and maybe a little bit of your
Um,
background.
sure. So I was, just like everybody else, I was supportive of the convoy. And one night I texted a friend of mine who lives close to me, and we're not too far from the highway. And we knew the convoy was going to roll through. So I texted him and I said, "Hey, do you want to go with me? You're right near the highway. Do you want to come in and wave them through?" And he actually told me, he said, "Well, I can't, because he owns a very large piece of land, and the truckers were supposed to rest at his property. Like over 100 trucks were going to rest at his property for the night, and he had food, and he had porta potties and a place for them to rest for the night."
Okay.
And so instead of going to the highway, I went to his house, and through that action, I ended up getting connected to various people that were actually working with the convoy.
Hmm.
So the convoy arrived in Ottawa, and on the Sunday, the first Sunday that they were there, the same friend of mine through various contacts called me up and said, "Hey, we know you're a retired Army officer. Is there anything that you can do and maybe come to Ottawa and help out with some of the logistics of what we're trying to do in Ottawa? So, within about 3 hours, I had arrived in Ottawa, and, packed for maybe about a week's worth. I figured I'd go straighten out some things and then, go on my merry way home. And, that would be my contribution. But
Yeah.
as it stood, I ended up being there for the entire time.
Yeah.
I left the city of Ottawa at about 5:30 on the Sunday night,
Okay.
last Sunday night.
Wow.
So
So so you basically were a fan, a supporter at the beginning of
yeah,
what was happening,
yes,
and then you found yourself dead center of
yes,
essentially the world's eyes came upon Ottawa. First of all, so you obviously built relationships with people such as Tamara Litch
yes,
and BJ and Chris Barber and all
yep.
those people that were, I guess, they were viewed as leadership and Freedom Convoy representation. What was that whole dynamic like? How did you guys mesh, I guess, as you're going through this crazy circumstance?
Yeah, and you know what? That's a really good word to use, mesh, because we all have very, very different backgrounds. We have totally different life experiences. I'm not a trucker.
Yeah.
I came from the military side, and then I was, after I retired from the Army, I was teaching software at a community college in Barrie, Ontario. And then, Chris is a trucker, and then Tamara brought her unique skills and experiences to all of that. And we just all understood what the overall goal was. What was the overall intention for being in Ottawa? And as long as we stayed focused on why we were there, we all found a way to just understand one another's point of view. And I gotta say, like, they're incredibly passionate people. I respect them tremendously. Without them, I wouldn't be on this interview talking about my experience in Ottawa.
Yeah.
Chris and Tamara and BJ and many of the members of really the original leadership team of the convoy. But without them inspiring other truckers to get involved, you know, I wouldn't have met a lot of other people that were there. And there's a lot of honest, hardworking leaders that were part of that convoy that maybe never did any of the media or got the media attention. But
Yeah.
there was a lot of really just strong leaders that were very passionate about the reasons we were all in Ottawa.
Yeah.
So we came together as a very large family, and in most of the cases, for a family, we don't even know each other's last names.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
it's kind of a family under fire kind of a thing.
So you guys land in Ottawa, you guys get
Mhm.
connected. Let's fast forward, whatever, 3, 4, 5, 6 days type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
You have
Yeah.
convoy groups that are kind of splinter groups through Ottawa. You have the main drag on Wellington, and you have Bank
Yeah.
Street, and then you have others by Coventry, and then there's also apparently there's people outside of Ottawa. What is your goal in terms of, like, let's say you're 7 days in? What are you guys trying to do? Are you just trying to hold ground? Are you trying to get as much media coverage to get the message out? What's going through your minds at this point?
Well, we one of the things that's important to understand is because of the whole money thing, like the vast amounts of money that Canadians contributed, through their hard-earned dollars. That's how they expressed their support for what we were doing. They formed a corporation. They had to form a legal nonprofit organization, and then they did elect a board of directors that were from all, they were all truckers. And so from that point on, like, we had a semi-established leadership. And so what we did as a leadership, or let's say some sort of organization, is we tried to focus on 3 different things. We focused on getting as many trucks as possible up onto Wellington. That was really an important strategic objective, was to have as many trucks as we could up on Wellington. And the reason we wanted to be on Wellington is because that put the pressure on the federal government. And the more we're on Wellington, the less we were putting pressure on the residents of Ottawa.
Mhm.
So that was a strategic objective for us, and it just makes sense. Like there's nothing complicated about that. You to be relevant and to be on the front page of the paper, you have to be basically on the footsteps of Parliament.
Yeah.
The second thing is really was maintaining morale within the truck convoy, because we were spread out all over the place. You know, and if we lost the morale of the truckers, they would start kind of leaving, right? And not to say that it was, they were leaving because of low morale. It was just maybe just communication. So they weren't.
Yeah.
Some of them felt like they were fully set. They were happy. If you looked at Coventry, if you looked at the truckers we had out at 88, incredibly
Yeah.
high morale.
Yeah. Yeah.
But some of the truckers we just couldn't reach all of the time, right? And so that was a difficult piece. So we wanted Wellington, we wanted morale, and then the last thing is we wanted media. We wanted. I don't want to use the term friendly media. I want to say independent media and balanced, media or balanced journalism. We didn't want everyone to just automatically agree with us. We just wanted
Sure.
to tell our part of the story. And we knew we had no chance whatsoever at getting the mainstream media to tell the truth.
Yeah.
So I think we were extremely effective at shutting out the mainstream media, because they were taking everything we said completely out of context all of the time. I
Mm.
made a joke about Justin Trudeau, and the mainstream media turned it into a uh, just completely out of context and twisted my words to mean something related to guns.
Mm.
Because
Yeah.
I said he had a 22 caliber mind in a 357 Magnum world,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden the mainstream media is painting us as you know gun crazed lunatics because
Yeah.
of a joke, of it, basically because of an insult.
Totally.
Yeah, so
And
we focused on those three areas. The hardest part by far really was communication, though, and I kind of I'm at fault for that. I devised kind of those priorities, but really communication with the truckers is a big mistake that I made. I think that should have been more than anything my number one priority.
interesting. See, when we were on the ground, myself, my brother-in-law, Jeremy, and Paul, we hit the ground day one. Like we were last minute, we came out because we wanted to kind of capture what was going on and be that independent middle ground, like actually show the real stories on the ground. I was not interested in telling my story or my view.
Yes,
We
yes,
and we're genuine guys that want to know the truth, and so we
yeah,
operated that way. And one of the and we have, if people ever go through our Instagram page or Facebook pages, you'll see beautiful people all through the
yeah,
convoy of real stories. But one of the
yeah,
things I noticed, because we got to know a lot of quote unquote block captains or
yeah,
self-appointed captains in different areas, and right on the corner of
yeah,
Rideau and Wellington, there was that kind of was
yeah,
a party corner. Our hotel was there. We got to know those guys, and they seemed independent, I would say, of other groups.
yes,
And so I noticed a
yes,
lot of that happening. So I understand when you say the communication would have been tough, especially in my
yeah,
opinion. It seemed like a lot of A-type personalities as well that descended on
yeah,
Ottawa with the same goal in
yeah,
mind. Don't get me wrong, but
yeah,
anyways, it's
yeah.
very interesting to
And,
see.
and
So go ahead.
in that corner that you talk about, those the all the members that were on that corner in front of the hotel were extremely dedicated, extremely passionate about their reasons for being there.
Absolutely.
But in sometimes, our goals just didn't line up.
Okay.
Um, but we found a way to do our best to work together. And that's an important thing for people to understand, right? We said from the beginning, this was an organic movement
Yeah.
of a lot of people coming to Canada from all provinces that were able to get there, but it was still difficult to work as a team sometimes, just because the goals didn't always match up exactly. But I do
Yeah.
think that in the end, as an entire movement, we pulled it together, and we proved, I think, from my perspective, we proved without a shadow of a doubt that we were a peaceful protest. And I said it in that final press conference that we brought bouncy castles, Canadian flags, and hugs, and a lot of love and a lot of patriotism, and the police brought the violence. There was no violence in Ottawa for 3 weeks until the police showed up, and we proved by our actions that we were always a peaceful protest, and we remain that way. And that's when I didn't announce the peaceful withdrawal. According to Tom Marazzo, it was a consensus. There
Yeah.
was a lot of the leaders, the truck leaders, that came to me and said, we we should probably withdraw. Like, there's nothing to be gained here by being beaten by a Gestapo type of a law enforcement,
Yeah.
with automatic weapons and non-lethal projectiles. I mean, you saw with Rebel Media, they shot Alexis Lavoie right in the leg at point blank range.
Yeah.
I was 10 feet away when I saw the woman and the man get trampled by the horse.
Yeah.
So there was nothing to be gained by literally just allowing yourself to be beaten in the streets. So we recognized we had the power, but the police ultimately brought all of the physical force and the violence, and we just didn't want any part of it.
So I think if anyone goes back and looks at the footage from this, there was a clear turning point. In my opinion, it's fairly obvious to see the tone of the protest before and after when Emergency Measures Act was invoked. But before we move to that, is one thing I noticed, it was really the whole time, it was I've used this term before on a couple shows I ended up being interviewed on, because I was in the ground zero all the time. I use a term of a tale of two stories that are really trying to be told. Is you guys had a clear message, and I'm not saying this out of my opinion, basically hearing what you guys were saying at your press conferences over and over again, being as clear as you can about the messaging. And then you would have other messaging coming from the city of Ottawa and the council. You'd have coming from federal politicians and leaders of our country. And then also mainstream media would also spin, or whatever it was, would put out different messaging. How much of a focus was it for you guys to counter that as much as possible? Or did you just kind of put your hands and be like, they're going to do what we do and we're going to do our thing?
And I think that's really the way it worked. Is we knew there was no influencing mainstream media at all. They were just going to paint whatever narrative that Justin Trudeau and the PMO's office told them to paint. So we had no faith that they would actually be journalists.
Yeah.
And they proved that as well, because I've seen some of the footage. I've seen, I stood up to a podium with people, and I said, okay, we're going to do a peaceful withdrawal. And what do they report it? That they're turning tail and leaving, or that they're quitting, or they're retreating. I mean, just the simple language they can't even get correct, right?
Yeah.
So, in terms of messaging, we were very effective with our own live streaming and our own mainstream media messaging, but we did have something. We had this software that we were using. Once we got every driver's phone number, we could push out messages through an SMS. And so we were pushing out messages to individual drivers as far as we could share. And, for those who didn't have the phones or the technology or whatever to receive those, we were saying, okay, now make sure that everybody, your block captain, your truck captain, make sure that you're spreading the word to everybody that doesn't have the technology in their trucks. And so we were sending runners, we were typing out things. We actually had we had a photocopier that was donated, and we were printing off messages and hand delivering them to vehicles and everything.
Okay.
And constantly on video calls, constantly on different apps and stuff like that to communicate. But it was probably the single biggest challenge that we had was communication internally.
Wow, no, I believe it. That it's the amount of people that came to Ottawa, not including the all the crowd that would come and go throughout the different time periods, that's just a massive effort to be able to effectively communicate.
Yes.
If we can jump to originally the money with GoFundMe, there's a lot of
Yep.
people immediately that backed you guys, supported you. People were
Yes.
giving that way. I think everyone knows what happened with GoFundMe, how they
Yep.
voluntarily worked with the Canadian government, because GoFundMe is obviously based out of the States.
Yep.
But then we also have, then you guys shifted after that whole thing happened to Give, Send, Go. And it was actually amazing to see how fast people seem to shift and support and give. And then obviously that got interrupted again. Maybe, do you mind talking a little bit about that process? And then also, what was the fallout? There's rumors flying around. There was some money released, some not. What's happening with it if it was released? Or did
Yeah.
everything get shut
Yeah.
down? What was, and also, I guess, what was the intention of all that? So
Yeah.
feel free to go.
So, it's important to understand that because of that volume of money, that was never the original goal, even with Give, Send, Go, to raise the amount of money that was raised. But because of the massive amount of support, in terms of the financial support to the convoy, they created that board of directors, and they created the nonprofit organization. So they did set up a legal structure for the GoFundMe, and then they transferred that over to Give, Send, Go. And we had people there that were talking to the actual owner of Give, Send, Go,
Okay.
and trying to work with that person. But the problem that we faced was that when the Ottawa police and the federal government and everybody got involved, yes, they froze the account, or yes, they froze the money, but the way they really froze it was if any money was transferred, because that money wasn't transferred into individual people's accounts, it was put into a trust account.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it took more than one person to get that money out. So it's not like any one individual could all of a sudden, get $10 million dropped into their bank account. It went into a special trust account to be used for the convoy, not used for individuals that were part of any sort of leadership team. But the issue is this: when the federal government decided that, hey, we're just going to go in and start freezing people's bank accounts without any due process, without warrants, without any notification, they went on the mainstream media and started to brag about the fact that they shut down all these bank accounts, right? There was no due process at all. So my bank accounts were frozen. My credit cards were canceled.
Was this
my
before
spouse,
or after the Emergencies Act was enabled already? Do you remember?
I think the Emergency Act came out, and then all of a sudden,
Yeah.
I couldn't pay my bills anymore, that kind
Wow.
of thing. So no due process whatsoever.
Yeah,
So
totally.
definitely, the federal government had the ability to go in and freeze the trust account. So I don't even know what the status of that is, because that wasn't really my area of focus. But what I can say is that anybody associated with any sort of funding at all to this convoy had their bank accounts frozen. And so I know the trust account was frozen. So let's say, even for example, one of the board of directors had the money deposited into their account. It's frozen, and it can't be recovered until it's released by the government, right? But it's still part of a legal entity. So not one single person can withdraw that money anyway.
So, Tom, you said your bank accounts were frozen, like entirely. You couldn't access anything whatsoever.
Yep. They were returned last night, so they were unfrozen last night, but my credit cards have still been canceled. And my spouse's credit rating was dropped 109 points. Only because she was we had a joint credit card together. So when they canceled the joint credit card, then they went after and attacked her credit rating. I haven't looked at my credit rating. I can only imagine how bad that is.
Wow.
No warrants, no charges, no arrests, and the government of Canada deputized banks into acting on their behalf because they didn't have a legal framework to go and do it without a warrant or due process. So, my money has been returned to me through Bank of Montreal. I'm going to be transferring out of that and then closing all of my Bank of Montreal accounts. My understanding is they had a choice, and in my mind, they chose wrong.
Hmm.
They were told that they could have immunity from the federal government, so they went along with what the federal government has done.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, they chose wrong, and me personally, I'm going to pull my money and close my accounts out of Bank of Montreal.
Well, I'll add to that. Yesterday, I had about 7 different Zoom calls because we've been putting out the call on our social media. Have you, or do you know someone who's had their bank accounts frozen? We had a lot of people reach out to us, and oddly enough, the one thing I didn't expect to get was I had 3 different calls with people who said their accounts weren't frozen, but their credit rating drastically dropped overnight, which was very odd. And at the time,
Yes.
I honestly thought, okay, maybe that's a stretch. It's hard to connect, but they all gave to Freedom Convoy. Every single one of them did.
Yep.
And so you're not the only one who's saying that, just so you know. I've talked with other people
Yeah.
as well, and
Yep.
I've also seen proof because one of the guys that we know recorded a bank conversation where they said they actually got the federal government maybe mandate's the wrong word, but mandated them to close certain accounts. So that's
Yes.
a massive precedent that was set, Tom.
Yes.
What happened there?
Yes.
Do you mind expanding on that a little bit?
Well, and you know, this is the word precedent, right? And people have to understand that in you know, North American or first world nations legal system, precedents are extremely important and must be paid attention to. And what it means is that every time there is some sort of a legal action that takes place, that then becomes you know, a reference to future legal cases. Okay, so I think the majority of people probably understand a precedent, but you have to understand the one thing about a precedent. It always makes it easier to take someone's freedoms away just a little bit more every time it's used. Okay, so you know, they've set a precedent now where they can use this fintech system or whatever it's called, and they've set a precedent where they can just go in and attack your finances without any due process.
Yeah.
So what about the next time that I have wrongthink? What's the next time that what I do doesn't, the deputy prime minister or the minister of finance, she doesn't agree with my thinking. When I have wrongthink, according to her, because she gets to be judge and jury, she then turns to law enforcement and says, okay, I don't agree with that guy, turn off his means to financially support himself. It gets easier every single time they do it, right? And this is why we were there for mandates, for vaccine mandates, because, you know, now you tell me, and by the way, you know, vaccines have gone to the Supreme Court a few times in our history, because they were related to schools and education and vaccines. And each time the Supreme Court struck it down. And so we always have these precedents. Once a judge at even a lower court or a superior court or even the Supreme Court rules in favor of something, that's the new precedent. But when the government tries to, you know, enact the, they created the Emergencies Act, and then they tried to slide in this thing about the finances. And then the Chrystia Freeland went on and started to brag about the fact that even if the Emergency Act goes away, she has no intention of giving up this power to attack your financial institution or your finances without due process. So she's gone on public record and says, yeah, we want to keep that power. So in my mind, you know, a lot of people said, well, why would he just go, you know, where he would admonish the Indian government because of the way the Indian government were handling the farmers. And he was, you know, Justin Trudeau was telling them, you know, go talk to the truckers, meet with the truckers, listen to the truckers, right? Really admonishing the Indian government. And yet not truckers, farmers. I meant to say farmers. Yep. But yet we had truckers and we had farmers on his front lawn. And he never talked to us. He went the nuclear option with the Emergencies Act, and then started attacking people's finances that didn't agree with him because he didn't have a legal mechanism to do anything else.
Yeah.
Right. So again, we were there to fight for the vaccine mandates, because, you know, informed consent is a two-part formula. These vaccines have not been cleared by Health Canada. They're under an interim order. And people, it amazes me that people don't understand that yet. These vaccines usually take between 7 to 10 years to go through all of their clinical trials, and then they receive approval through, you know, the Canadian government. These are under an interim order until sometime in the future. I think it might be the spring of 2022. So this year in the spring, or it could be 2023 sometime as well. But they are not fully approved vaccines or medicines or medical. They're still in a medical trial. And most people don't understand that. And so when you have this, there are laws around informed consent, because informed consent is a two-part formula. You must inform, a doctor must inform a patient of what the risks are, right? But the doctor must be able to point to the risks and to tell the patient what the risks are based on the long-term safety data. Like, for example, they have to say you have a 2% risk of, you know, this happening to you, or, you know, these are the potential side effects. They can't do that right now because the studies are not completed. But they're coercing people into giving up their consent. Okay, in coercion, if you try to coerce somebody through bullying or threatening of loss of employment or anything like that, that's actually under the criminal code a crime. It's actually assault. And yet our Canadian government is running around saying these vaccines are safe and effective. Well, guess what? How do they know when the clinical trials are not done? And it's still under an interim order to use these medications. So the Canadian public is being used as the experimental control group. And they don't get that. So now let's go one step forward. Now he's mandating that you participate in a medical experiment and you don't want to, so therefore he's going to break the law, he's going to violate informed consent. And then when you show up to assert your charter rights, which we were actually told by Justice McLean that we had a right to be in Ottawa, he invokes the War Measures Act and then sneaks in this little provision about banking, right? And then they go on TV and actually brag about the fact that they're not going to give up that power. Right? So now we're using coercion to force a medication on people that choose not to have it because they can't meet the standards of informed consent. Then we can have, invoke the Emergency Act and suspend your charter rights and freedoms in order to sneak in legislation that allows them to attack your financial system or your financial support. Yeah. So, a lot of this stuff is tied, and I'm sure you've seen the videos going around about the digital ID that the banks and the Banking Federation are working on right now in conjunction with the government and law enforcement. Like, you just have to step back and look at the big picture here a little bit and realize that we are enormously less free 2 years after this pandemic than we were when we originally started all this stuff. We have much less freedom than we did. But here's the most sinister part of all of it. The Constitution and the Charter of Rights are the most supreme laws that we have in this country. So even the Emergency Act cannot override the Charter. It cannot override the Constitution. All acts in this country must be reviewed for compliance to the Charter and the Constitution. So how is it that when a judge says that we have a charter right to be there in Ottawa to do that protest, the only laws we broke while we were there were actually bylaws, the way we parked our vehicles. These were parking infractions. And they launched the War Measures Act, or sorry, the prettier name is the Emergency Act, against citizens without any dialogue, without any talking. And then they violated our charter rights and our constitutional rights to do what we were doing.
Yep.
With an illegal emergency act, in my book, because I don't understand how that act allowed them to give themselves the power to override the charter. What was the threat? What was the imminent threat that we posed? Bouncy castles on the front lawn of Parliament for 3 weeks? If we were such an imminent threat, how did they let us into the city to begin with? Why did the Ottawa police work with us for 3 weeks? You know,
Let's jump. Sorry, Tom. I was
ahead.
going to say. So I just want to clarify a couple of things you've said. Just so you got. So the movement of the Freedom Convoy though wasn't, I guess, like a lot of people have been trying to say, it's an anti-vax movement, right? And I'm personally met a lot of truckers say, I'm vaccinated, but I'm here.
Yeah.
So you're saying, I don't want to put words in your mouth, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're saying it was the anti-mandating.
Yes.
It is basically the Freedom Convoy is self-explanatory, but just to be very clear, what did the Freedom Convoy stand for coming into Ottawa?
They wanted to end all federal COVID mandates. They wanted the vaccine mandates gone. They wanted the masking mandates gone. They wanted the passports gone. You know, and they wanted to reassert their constitutional and charter rights. So by reasserting that, all of those things would be gone. So this is really what we wanted. But as time went by and we were getting nowhere with any level of government in this country, we started to evolve our thinking a little bit. We still kept in line. The original intent was to end all the COVID-19 mandates and everything associated with that. But we started to evolve to the point where we said, you know, maybe we get the mandates ended, we leave, and the very next day, he comes out with a mandate again, right? Now, look at the other thing here. You know, the other bit of smoke and mirrors here, as far as I understand, you know, Justin Trudeau ended the Emergencies Act, but Ontario was still under a state of emergency, last I checked. Because Doug Ford went on TV with a lot of tough talk and bravado and a little bit of theater, you know, how upset he was to impose an emergency in Ontario. And then a day or two later went on and acted all folksy again because he thought, you know, I'm sick of this COVID stuff. And he does this complete 180 on his stance, but he still kept his emergency in Ontario. So, you know, I'm very skeptical. I'm very, very skeptical every time they end one of their states of emergency and try to make it look like, you know, it's for us. There's no way. There's no way ending the Emergency Act was for my benefit or yours. I'll never believe that.
Yeah, interesting. It's it was definitely to see the complete reversal happening on that was, I think it was confusing for everyone unless you're kind of behind the scenes. So one more thing as well on something you talked about is when your accounts were frozen, there's also this Terrorism Financing Act that seems to have been used but quietly used during this, but and also some of the language coming from the government did use terms like terrorist, obviously amongst all these other types of terms being used. Did anyone that you know at all, including leadership, yourself, even guys on the ground, did any of them have any charges laid that involved terrorism acts whatsoever?
Not a single person in Ottawa that I knew anything about that had any connection to any fundamentalism or extremist thinking or ideology or anything like that.
Yeah.
Had they even brought up language like that in any of the meetings that I was in, or like any of the other truck leaders or convoy like volunteers, they would have been immediately been shouted down and kicked out of the building. There's absolutely there was nothing of the sort. There was no interest in that at all. But you brought up a really good point, and I want to say two things about this though. I haven't heard the word terrorism for 2 years until the convoy rolled into Ottawa. And then you wanted to start, you know, we went from, you know, being viewed as misogynist with unacceptable views to all of a sudden, you know, no longer a fringe minority, but people that needed to be dealt with under the Emergencies Act. Okay, and I want the second thing I want to say about this, which I find absolutely ludicrous, almost hysterical, is that there's a group called Diagolon. and you should look this up, and your viewers should look this up. This is how crazy it got. Diagolon and their arch enemy, Circleon. Okay, diagonal and circle.
Okay.
This was a meme. This was on the internet months ago. This was a group of guys on social media that were just joking around and made a meme, and they were circulating it so that people would come that were like-minded and have a big fun barbecue, because I think the mandates out in Alberta got relaxed, so they were just trying to have a big party. That craving for human contact and having fun.
Yeah.
Well, I watched two Liberal members of Parliament last week read actual official statements in Parliament during the debates, whether or not the federal Parliament would vote on the Emergency Act for Trudeau, and they brought up Diagolon and Circleon. They're using a meme, a joke, something that doesn't exist, to try to convince Canadians that there are domestic terrorists out there. Like this is your CSIS and RCMP dollars at work. This is literally like saying Scooby-Doo and Shaggy are a domestic terrorist organization, and we should declare the War Measures Act against Canadian citizens who are in bouncy castles, dancing in the streets and singing "Oh Canada."
Yeah.
This is the level of stupidity that we have as a Liberal Party in this country right now. Wow. And of course, the NDP, they just buy right into it. Right.
Yeah.
And, it was amazing. We went from singing "Oh Canada." I was there the day I was right there with the veterans when they pulled the fence down around the War Memorial. I was there when we sang "Oh Canada." I was there when they neatly stacked that fence into a pile. I was there when the steps around the War Memorial were shoveled and cleaned. I was there when they started doing the vigil to make sure it was protected from any form of desecration or vandalism. I saw those guys out there doing it. I was there when we had a retired Padre. He did a prayer, and then we sang "Oh Canada." I was there when the police came in and thought that people were doing damage to the memorial, when they realized it was the veterans themselves who earned that memorial with their blood, sweat, and tears. When they realized it was veterans, they quickly left the scene very peacefully. But go, a week later, and I'm seeing veterans wearing their berets and medals getting beaten on the ground by the police in Ottawa. And right behind them, there's a guy getting butt stroked from a rifle while he's on the ground. This is what we saw in Ottawa.
Let's talk about those turn of events. Sorry to cut you off, Tom, but you had what seemed to be negotiations and even a deal with the city of Ottawa to help relieve burden on the residents, move trucks, consolidate. There were letters that whether they got released or leaked, I know there is some, we won't get into this, but some people part of the convoy were saying they're fake, but they turned out to be real. You guys were trying to work this in good faith. And then all of a sudden it seemed like the deal was dead. And then obviously escalation seemed to start happening. Maybe talk us through that.
So what had happened was several people had advised us, maybe we start talking about the talking to the city. And the reason is because we all watched this absolutely insane Zoom video. It was a Zoom meeting between the police services board and the police chief at the time, the first one. Mm-hmm. And the language was just the most insane thing that I had ever heard. A democracy under siege or a city under, just really unbelievably out of touch language that was being used to describe this convoy. And so we quickly realized, okay, we're going to have to do something to take the pressure off of the city, which will then in turn take the pressure off the police to come after us. And this was after they raided us at Coventry, right? Okay. And so we said, okay, we'll start working with the city to try to take the pressure off the city, get all of our vehicles up onto Wellington, and then consolidate all of our vehicles in a smaller area so that there was less pressure for the city, less pressure for the police. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we started back channeling. through a guy named Dean French, and I can say that because he's now come forward and said, you know, he participated in that.
Okay.
So I advised, and so did other people, that, you know, it was a good move. It was the responsible thing to do in order to relieve the pressure on the city themselves, or the occupants, that we consolidate more on Wellington. But we also recognized that if we were all on Wellington, we were in a much more tactically vulnerable position for raids or arrest or whatever. So I remember being in a conversation with Superintendent Rob Drummond of the Ottawa Police, and I said, listen, we recognize that if we move up onto Wellington only, we're much more vulnerable. But please keep in mind that we have truck convoys in various locations around the city. If you move in against us, those convoys will start doing slow rolls, and they're going to interrupt the rest of it. So they exist there to be a form of protection, so to stop you from raiding us again. And I told the police, I said, look, we're going to go tit for tat. If you behave in a negative way, we'll behave in a negative way, but we'll never exceed your negative behavior. If you're positive, we'll stay positive. Right. And we said, your first freebie was with the raid that you did at Coventry. That's your freebie. So we tried to work with them. We tried to calm them down. Obviously, it didn't work in the long run because they initiated the Emergency Act, and then we went back to the police and they said, yeah, whatever deal you had in the media with the mayor and the city, that deal's off the table. That's done. It's over. So, you know, those letters were true. They were real. Unfortunately, what I didn't like about that was that the mayor of Ottawa was, as we were walking into the meeting with the police and the city manager and stuff to try to work out details about that, the mayor of Ottawa was in the media doing a victory lap around town. It was like, what are you trying to line up a book deal? Like, honestly, we're literally walking in to talk about details, and he let that go to the media and was doing a victory lap around town. And then we started hearing from the truckers. Remember what I said about communication? They felt like they were betrayed. So from my point of view, I think the city made every attempt to play us. And you know what? I think they earned a few points on the board for that, because they acted, I think, in bad faith. And then you saw the result. We never did move off of that corner and up onto Wellington, which was what the deal was supposed to be. So they acted in bad faith as far as I'm concerned. And now when you look at the mayor, he's trying to be good guy. And then all of a sudden now that he's arrested all the trucks and he's confiscated vehicles, he's now doing another victory lap saying, we're confiscating the vehicles and we're going to auction off people's property without any due process. They seize the vehicles, they've claimed them, and now he's on the media saying, yeah, we're gonna sell off those trucks to try to recoup the cost of police coming in and beating the crap out of Canadians. You can't make this stuff up. You
so
know,
sorry, Tom, did anybody from, obviously you guys were working with the city in some capacity to try to relieve, and we all know the city's got no ability to end mandates on provincial or federal terms. Did anyone from federal, whether it's Liberal, Conservative, NDP, even the Bloc, anyone reach out to you guys to try to talk with you guys as the leadership?
Nobody, not a single time. And I did my own media events. I called for them to sit with me. I sent emails to them. I sent our roadmap to freedom personally to Pierre Poilievre in an email on his public website. And I said, look, you know what? I want to talk. You know, Poilievre is probably, as long as the Conservatives start to behave like Conservatives, he'll probably be the next PM. You know, he's not my first choice. But, you know, let's be realistic here. You know, but I reached out to everyone that I could think of inside the government of Canada, and nobody talked to me. And I was talking to somebody who at one point, this person worked in the PMO's office under Stephen Harper, right? So they were on the Conservative side. And I was like, I don't care who I talk to, you just get a message. And by the way, that Roadmap to Freedom document we created, we sent it to every federal party in Canada. We sent it to them. to say, since you guys can't even meet long enough to have or like vote on actually creating a plan, we did your work for you yet again. So here's the plan. This is what we'd like to see. And the two things that were really important to me, there were 9 points in it, but what were really important to me was the charter reference, which is something that would be heard by the Supreme Court of Canada as to how our charter rights have been violated. And the second thing that I wanted was a public inquiry of independently selected delegates to be part of a public, nationally televised inquiry to find out what happened. Why for 2 years, 2 weeks to flatten the curve turned into 2 days to flatten a peaceful protest. We wanted to know what steps were taken in government. We want to know on a public inquiry what steps were taken at the government level, at the provincial level, and what role did the mainstream media play in all this too? We want to see the emails. We want a public inquiry as to how this has happened.
Who was involved with writing that roadmap?
We had a team of lawyers that wrote that.
You had a number of people like Brian Peckford,
yes,
Dr. Paul Alexander, Dr. Roger Hodgkinson, other people who are professionals in different areas, whether it's medical, political.
yes.
Did they obviously joined and reached out? You even had some people from, or a specific person from Hollywood reach out to lend support and that type of thing. Did any of them, first of all, have input on this roadmap, or did they help you guys in conversations too regarding this roadmap and direction, or are they more so just lending their support with their platforms and their names, so to speak?
Really good question, because it was really a combined effort, like many different conversations. That contributed overall to that document. And I know that we personally consulted Brian Peckford. I mean, if you're talking about doing a charter or a constitutional reference at the Supreme Court, and you have one of literally the founding fathers of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms right there sitting in a room in front of you, obviously you're going to ask.
Yeah, he's the man when it comes to that.
He's the man, right? So we obviously took his counsel on that entire issue.
Okay.
And from my perspective, I do believe that the Canadian Charter of Rights is a very solid document, with the exception of Section 1. Section 1 is what has allowed all of us to get into so much trouble over the last 2 years. Yep. If Section 1 was maybe a little bit more robust and had a much threshold, a much higher threshold, maybe we wouldn't have been in this position. But then again, it seems like the federal government and the provincial governments just literally ignore the laws and make it up as they go, because they control the media and they get on there and they sell a good story to people, even though they're lying right to their face. And why do I know they're lying to the face? Because every time Justin Trudeau gets up there and demonizes somebody for following the wrong science, it makes me cringe. And I'll tell you why. I spent this year, this Christmas, for 10 days over the Christmas holidays at the Hospital for Sick Kids in Toronto with one of my children. I was in the ICU, slept overnight. 10 days I was there. Had I gone 50 kilometers down the highway to McMaster Children's Hospital in Hamilton, I wouldn't have been able to walk through the front doors because I'm unvaccinated. So which science exactly is Justin Trudeau talking about? Which science should I follow? The one that completely alienates and doesn't allow me to advocate or to comfort my child who's in an ICU? Or the one that says, you know what, you need to be with your child when they're sick and in a hospital? So which science does this guy want us to follow? Because I'm not sure. Like you look up a face mask, any virus is roughly around 3 microns. But those masks that everyone are running around with are 60. Mm-hmm. It's literally like kicking a fly through a fence or a field goal. Like, people what frustrates me more than anything is when people don't independently think for themselves and use critical thinking, but they just regurgitate mainstream media talking points. Drives me crazy. People said to me, "Oh, I got the vaccine so I could travel." And I say to them, you know that thing that passport you're using to travel, open up the front cover and look at section 6. It actually, the charter's printed in there. It says you were born with the right to travel. And that is a supreme law in this country. You can't have that revoked. So just exercise your rights and you'll be allowed to keep them. You only lose your rights, not because of a decree of a government, but because you refuse to exercise your own right. That's when
So
you
you,
lose them.
so you guys, obviously Freedom Convoy was a massive exercising of your right to protest based
Yes.
on freedoms eroding over the last number of years, and obviously culminating to now. In regards to where you guys are moving, actually, you know what? Before I move on to there, do you mind if I ask you a couple of rapid fire questions?
Sure, sure.
Is first of all, did you guys have any plan at all to overthrow the government?
Never, never.
Okay, because that was heard by a lot. I wanted you to be able to hear that from the convoy
Yep.
leadership mouth on that, because that's always been touted a while.
Mhm.
Have you had much contact with the other Freedom Convoy leaders post the weekend that the police really moved in force?
Yes, all except for Chris Barber and obviously Tamara,
Yep.
because what's absurd is that Tamara is still being held in custody without bail. 3 weeks ago, when an insane person with a criminal record ran over 4 people at the protest in Coutts, Alberta, he's already out on bail. But Tamara, who organized a peaceful protest, was denied bail by a judge who, it turns out, and I researched this, was a failed federal Liberal Party candidate. She ran as a Liberal Party member of Parliament, and she didn't get elected. So she's a card-carrying member of the Liberal Party, and she held Tamara without bail on conspiracy to commit mischief. I'm sorry, but even the slightest hint of a conflict of interest, she should have recused herself of that specific case.
So Tamara is still right now
Still in
sitting in
jail,
a
yes,
cell.
yes, yes.
Any idea of when her next, does she have a court date coming up, or?
I don't know that. I didn't get confirmation. She might have an appearance in front of a judge either on Friday or Monday, from
Okay.
last I heard, one of those 2 days.
And so Chris Barber is released, is that true?
He was released, but nobody has had any contact, and I can only assume that he's abiding by conditions of his release, not to have contact with any members of the convoy.
Okay, so another thing I wanted to ask you as well is, during the Ottawa protest, there were a number of other events that sprouted up across Canada. You had at southern BC at the border there, you had Emerson, Manitoba, Coutts, Ambassador Bridge. Were those blockades instructed at all by Freedom Convoy Ottawa, or were those organic movements that happened on their own?
Absolutely 100% unequivocal. They were all organic movements that sprouted up across this country, across the US, across Europe, and across Australia and New Zealand, all on their own. We had no involvement in directing people what to do. I know at cases on social media, our members reached out to their members just as a sign of support, but never were we had our own problems, like in our own challenges, and we were trying to make sure we were taking care of our own situation. We were happy to see these things pop up everywhere, but we had no influence on what was happening in any of those other locations. There was just too many.
Were you concerned at all with, let's talk about the Canadian one specifically, because now you are jumping into the federal crime area of stopping commerce between two nations, and
Yeah.
I'm not talking about the cause behind it. I'm talking about the underlying principle. Were you concerned at all that that could shift the narrative or the storyline of what you guys were trying to do?
It had crossed my mind. It did, and you know, there was always that possibility that it could be interpreted that way, that where we became some sort of a national headquarters for all protests everywhere.
Yeah.
So we were very aware that the potential existed to create that narrative, And we walked away from it. We said, no, we don't know the members. We're not going to take ownership of anything other than what we're physically doing right here in the city of Ottawa. So we did not give any direction at all.
So it might be hard to answer this next question, but what's next? Our guys in the ground who were still in Ottawa, they met up with a couple of groups that were outside Ottawa. They didn't really have intentions to go back to Ottawa, but they were still hanging out as, I'll call them, splinter groups. A lot of guys have gone home. So what's next? Is the movement dead, or does it just look different going forward? Any thoughts on that?
It's certainly not dead. I'm in communications with several members, and what's interesting is I'm meeting more new members.
Okay.
Right. We're calling Freedom Convoy 2.0 right now, because there's still a lot of work to be done. There's still a lot of work to be done, and there's no plans that I've been made aware of to physically go and do anything. Like, we're not heading back to Ottawa. We're not going anywhere else. What I think we've learned a lot about this particular experience, and we're just going to regroup, and we're going to be very cautiously optimistic that maybe the Conservatives are going to find a crack to get through. We don't know. So we're very much taking a wait and see approach for the moment. But I think, if we get into a bait and switch situation where he ended the mandates, the provinces are dropping all of theirs, and then all of a sudden people wake up one day and they realize, oh, the provinces dropped theirs because there's still a federal one in place. That's when I think it will cause more people to participate in a new evolved action. Because people are not just going to walk away from this and say, hey, you beat the crap out of us in Ottawa, so we're going to go home and give up. These people are not going to just roll over that easy. We were encouraged by what some of the Conservative senators did in the Senate over the last couple of days. But, from our point of view, there's not a critical mass of senators, and there's certainly not a critical mass of MPs that could stop all of this from happening. So I think what we're all, if COVID-19 restrictions didn't wake people up, then it has to be the banking legislation that's going to have to start waking people up. And if you don't wake up from COVID or the banking, then as far as I'm concerned, you're lost, and I'm not wasting my time on you. I'm just going to do what I have to do to protect my family. And that's really what all this is about. So, what's next is it is a tough question, but we're just going to take a wait and see approach right now. And if we don't think the government is conducting themselves as a free, democratically elected body should, then yeah, I would expect that every Canadian is going to take some sort of an action, I hope.
Well, no doubt. Whether people might argue what I'm about to say, but whether directly or indirectly, the Freedom Convoy definitely made a lot of things happen. I think I can speak from my experience of not only just driving into Ottawa, seeing, and I'm not saying it's an exaggerated word, the countless people lining cities, towns, even where there seemed to be no communities, people were coming onto the highways. So what I'm saying is that I think it's raised hope in people's hearts and minds. I think it made people feel like they're not alone in terms of how they're feeling. Not to mention the movements that have sparked in majority of all major cities in Canada. Now you look at different countries around the world. There's a Freedom Convoy right now in the US. It's just starting from California to DC, whether you look at Australia, whether you look in the UK, whether you look in France, and the countries go on. All those things have seemed to be sparked, or courage is contagious in a sense. Two more things to say. You also notice that there was a major change in the Conservative Party in terms of leadership. Whether people argue that's directly or indirectly, the timing is at the very least extremely coincidental.
Yes.
You also see provincial leaders, majority of them across our country, drop mandates or make plans to drop mandates. All of this happened within a 3-week period of time. So all that to say, do you feel like you guys have accomplished a lot? And are you proud of what you guys have been able to do?
I, that's a double-edged sword, because we left Ottawa without ending the vaccine mandates. So the major goal that we went there to get, um, because of violence, we didn't achieve that objective. So that's the sort of negative side of it. But the very positive, the overwhelming positive piece to that is we woke up a lot of Canadians. And like you said, a lot of people realized they weren't alone in their thinking. And the number of people that said to me personally while I was in Ottawa that, after 2 years, they're finally proud to be Canadians again. And it was the truckers that brought it. That's pretty impressive, to be honest. I was expecting that the doctors were going to be, or sorry, the lawyers. I thought our lawyers would be the first line of defense in this whole COVID thing, and it turns out they weren't. Then I thought when the vaccine came out that the doctors would be our second line of defense, and they were not. They were silent. And it turns out, it was the truckers in this country that inspired the entire planet to start rethinking what was happening in their lives. And so, we were very, very aware that there was 1 billion people on this planet watching what we were doing. And that's pretty intimidating and overwhelming, but it's highly motivating. And so, we don't believe our movement is over. We don't feel that we lost. We feel the greatest accomplishment was waking people up to what was really going on, and also connecting people that realized something was wrong. And that's the biggest thing, is the connection that we found each other. I'm
Yeah.
sitting here on an interview with you. I was a guy, 3.5 weeks ago that didn't have a voice, but because of the truckers, I get to speak, what I believe to be the truth of that experience.
Wow. Yeah, that's very cool. There's when I was reflecting on my time there, and again, I was there trying to capture what was happening. That was my goal. I was trying my best to leave my personal biases and thoughts out of it. I
Yeah.
believe part of the reason why Canada has gotten to a place it is because media isn't doing their proper job. So I
Mhm.
was trying my best, and my Jeremy as well. We were trying our best to do that. One of my favorite moments, with that in mind, one of my favorite moments that stood out to me was I jumped up on this one semi, one random night, maybe in the first week, and there was this beautiful family inside of the semi truck right parked on Wellington. His name was Gurtek, Punjabi
Yeah.
man with three girls,
Yeah.
and two girls and a son and his wife in there. And I asked him a number of questions. And I asked him, including a question regarding the racial terms that have been thrown around regarding the convoy, him being a minority in this country as well, what his take was on it. And he answered one, and he said a number of things, saying like it's all hugging and kissing and people
Yeah.
giving money. There's nothing of that sort. But then he made one comment to me, and this was my most favorite moment. He says, "I have never been more proud to be Canadian." And he's parked on Wellington with
Yes.
his family sleeping in the cab, standing and fighting for what he believes is freedom and rights. So, and you guys can see that on our Instagram and find that story. But Tom, is there any moment that stands out to you as like maybe the bright spot or your favorite moment, or something that just stands out to you from your entire time there?
Yeah, there was and somebody asked me this question recently, and I answered it. I had left Wellington. I was heading back to our conference room where we were kind of trying to organize things. And I saw this young teenage boy, maybe he was about 12, 13, I don't know. And he was just walking by everybody, and he would fist pump everybody and just say freedom. And honestly, like, this kid got it. He was there supporting, and that's what it was about. And for me, that was a really, really important moment. But there was another one too. There was two that really, really stuck out to me, and it was just somebody, I don't know who it was, but they were holding up this sign, and I took a picture of it. And this sign said, that that lies don't like to be questioned, but the truth doesn't mind.
Hmm.
And I saw that sign, I took a photo of it. I was like, wow, that's really powerful, because this is really what this is about. This is about an agenda that people can't seem to see. And when we ask for the truth, when we ask the tough questions, they can only counter with slander and name calling and bullying and physical force. But when we show up with, peace and love and integrity and bouncy castles, and they still smear us, it just kind of goes to show you how much power or how much force the federal government and the provincial governments have over our lives. These people are supposed to be elected to represent us, but they conduct themselves like kings and queens and emperors. So it's very, very frustrating to deal with this kind of a mentality. It's incredibly difficult. So
No, I hear you on that. I appreciate you, Shane, for that. And it's funny, I had so many questions and areas I wanted to go, and I feel like we could talk about this for 10 hours straight, man. So we will have to do this again to kind of dive into some other areas. But honestly, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're in the middle of decompressing from everything, and people are, I'm sure, just very curious as to how you're doing and what's going on. So thank you for your time.
yeah, I'm great, and I'm happy to be here and answer questions. And let's do this again, because I think there's a lot that needs to be unpacked, and a lot of questions that people, I'm sure, want answers to, and they deserve it. So I'm all for doing this again.
I'm committing to that too. Let's do it. Thanks,
All
Tom.
right, awesome. Thank you.